My apologies, technical difficulty. My browser just crashed for our live roundtable, but that's what happens live. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the Protecting the Value of Food Roundtable. Our discussion today will be focused on innovations in food donation and new models for food recovery stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also cover the existing gaps and opportunities within the food recovery space. I'm Andy Tamulinas, Director of Brand Marketing at Divert, and I'll be moderating the conversation today. I'm really excited about our panel. We have a great mix of experiences and perspectives here. So let's start with some brief introductions. Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work? Oh, is Sarah? We may have lost Sarah. Nina, why don't you kick us off? Introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today talking about this great topic. My name is Nina Sevilla. I'm a Sustainable Food System Program Advocate at NRDC, or the Natural Resources Defense Council. NRDC is a national environmental policy nonprofit that works on a wide range of environmental issues. And we work on food waste because when up to 40% of food in our country is wasted or thrown out, we waste all of that energy, land, resources, and everything that went into growing, processing, and transporting that food. Additionally, food is the number one material we send to landfills in our country and a large source of methane. So my team works at the federal, state, and local level on policies and programs to make sure that we prevent wasted food, that any extra food is redistributed and makes it to people's plates, and that any food scraps are composted. And also prior to NRDC, I worked on child nutrition programs at the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. So yeah, thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Well, we're happy to have you. Sarah, I see we've got you back here. So why don't you tell us who you are and a little bit about your role?
Sure. My name is Sarah Osborne. I'm the Public and Government Affairs Director for Safeway and Albertsons in both Washington State and Alaska. So that means that I also cover our philanthropic work, most of which is related to food security. And then since the pandemic, have had a strong focus on food waste as well as our food donations coming from our store network.
Awesome. Jacqueline, how about you?
My name is Jacqueline Pack, and I'm the Director of Food Acquisitions at the Central California Food Bank. And my job is the best job. I go out and I find all the food that would otherwise be thrown away and make sure it finds its forever home one way or another.
Awesome. And Jess, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Parker. I'm Divert's Food Recovery Program Manager. And I work directly with our customers to really help them strengthen their food donation programs and drive unsold edible food to people in need first and foremost. Before joining Divert, I worked in sustainable food systems in a couple of different capacities as a gleaning program coordinator in Vermont. And I also helped to launch a B2C marketplace for surplus food in the Boston market. And I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have all of you here today and to hear your diverse experiences and perspectives on our questions here. So let's get right into it. My first question is based on the USDA's recent report. So USDA recently released new data on the state of food insecurity in the United States. And just frankly, it's dire. They found that in 2022, 12.8% of households, that's 17 million households, reported being food insecure. And that is higher than both 2021 at 13.5 million households and 2020 at 13.8 million households. So my question for you all is, why do you think, according to this data, why do you think we're moving in the wrong direction with food insecurity? And Sarah, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. And I don't think that report was a surprise to anybody who works in the food security arena. Certainly, it was the reduction of our enhanced SNAP benefits that occurred during the pandemic. But at the same time, with inflation of all goods, including food, as well as I know at least in Washington, a very significant increase of cost of living. Just everything converging together is what's causing our current state of food insecurity right now.
And Jacqueline, I'm curious. You're on the front lines of a lot of this with the work at the food bank. What's your perspective on this?
I'm going to have to agree with Sarah. A lot of it too is you have what we call, or what it's called, like the working poor. So there's people who are actually working 40 plus hours a week, but their paycheck isn't matching what their expenditures are. So whether that be gas, rent, food, of course, medicine, daycare, all those things are converging. So what used to go a little bit further now doesn't.
Right. Nina, I'm curious, because I know some of your work is really focused on bringing different communities together and kind of sharing information. What's your perspective on why things seem to be not heading in the right direction?
Yeah, just have to agree with what the other folks have said. I think they really identified those two main causes. The first being the extra assistance, that expanded assistance during the pandemic eras ended, and then the increased inflation that's forcing everyone to make tough decisions on what to prioritize. And often healthy food is more expensive, organic, et cetera. And so these tend to be the casualties of these hard choices that we have to make.
Absolutely. It sounds like we're all seeing a lot of the same things out there. Jess, I'm curious, anything more to add from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just echo what the other panelists have already outlined here. Here at Divert, we're working directly with food bank partners and retailers across the country on a regular basis. And they're all expressing sort of the same challenges. And really, it's coming back to the fact that we're still seeing the effects of the pandemic today. And those ripple effects really continue to influence the ability of a lot of folks to be able to access healthy food.
Absolutely. So there's been a few references to, the sunsetting of some of the COVID provisions that were put in place as kind of temporary measures. I think looking beyond those temporary solutions that were put into place during the pandemic, I'm curious for your thoughts on what long-term solutions do you think it's going to take to solve the worsening levels of food insecurity? Like, what are the long-term lasting things we could put into place? And Jess, let's keep going with you. I'll start with you on this one.
Sure, Andy. I think really in the long term, it's important to recognize that food insecurity is an economic issue, right? You can't solve food insecurity or hunger without addressing poverty. So there really needs to be a focus on promoting economic stability, with efforts like increasing the federal minimum wage, strengthening those social safety nets, expanding programs like SNAP, TFAP, unemployment benefits, so that you're able to provide that ongoing support to folks in need. But I think, when you're addressing food insecurity, it's really essential to be able to strike a balance between advancing those lasting policy changes over the long term, while also strengthening those emergency relief measures that really address the immediate needs of food insecure individuals today. And I think, at Divert, that's really been a focus for us. It's, how can we identify the gaps and opportunities in the food donation network, and strengthen those donation programs for our customers? It really means helping to build reliable and consistent food recovery partnerships. It means using data to give retailers visibility into, which products within specific stores have significant donation opportunities. And then also being able to provide, education and training and resources so that folks really are able to donate the maximum amount of edible food, with a particular focus on increasing healthy, nutritious food donations. So, we know that there's still an incredible amount of opportunity to drive unsold edible food to donation. So it's really about how do we build systems and processes that make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing.
Great points. Nina, I'm curious your thoughts here. You're kind of in a similar space. Are you seeing different long-term solutions you think should be put into place, or what's your perspective here?
Yeah, well, I think Jess really hit the nail on the head. And actually, I was going to say the same thing, that food insecurity is an economic condition. And so I think it's about addressing the root causes that's going to really push the most long-term change. I think a couple different ways to do that. One is making some of those pandemic era programs permanent, and strengthening the social safety net. Another thing in that vein is around universal school lunch. We've seen that really be great at getting at childhood food insecurity, when you can just know that you're going to get a meal at school. But I think also when we talk about food security, we have to talk about access. So like physical access, where are the grocery stores located in neighborhoods? Are people able to get to those easily on public transportation? Are they close by? Those kinds of things. But then we are also, like Jess said, economic access. So livable wages and housing and healthcare all factor into this. And a lot of surveys show, and through my work too, we've heard a lot that people ultimately want to be able to purchase their own food, to have that economic autonomy. And so however we can set that up in the policy arena, or also different ways. One of the things that my team does is work with different cities across the United States to help reduce food waste, through different programs and policies and education campaigns and things like that. And in one focus group that our partners did in Philadelphia with some neighborhood groups, they really heard that people are, when they're traveling to other neighborhoods, they don't feel like they have the kind of access that they need and the foods that they want. And that's really where we heard again that ultimately people want to be able to purchase their own food. And so I think that's the real core of food security. And then one last point, I just mentioned this too, is that we have the hunger relief system, which is made up of food banks and pantries and soup kitchens. And there's always going to be emergencies and need that emergency relief. But it's not the same as the food security that I'm talking about, the economic security. And so we need to invest in both those systems, I think. And one way that my team is doing that is looking at federal policies, like the Farm Bill is up for renewal. And we can talk about this a little more when we get into the policy questions. But yeah, we're looking at the different policy levers that we can pull to create that that kind of economic security as well.
Yeah, great points. And policy for sure is a huge part of these long-term solutions. So thank you for those additions. Sarah, you're a little plugged into kind of a retailer's perspective. Curious if you have a different thought or anything to add to what's been mentioned here.
Yeah, it's definitely not different. But yeah, we have a strong partnership with the Food Research and Action Center that shares a lot of data with us. And we do know that SNAP is gets 9 times more food to households than the Food Banking Hunger Relief Network. So we do know that, long term, that is actually the answer to food insecurity, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. We don't know when that's going to happen. So in the meantime, the food banking system is what we have to meet the need. And so we're just working on trying to improve that. And for us, that just means, are we really capturing all the food available in our system and getting it to people? And that's important to us. It's not just donating it, but where are the gaps where we can actually get good quality food to the people, which is easily accessible to them. And there's so many points along the way. But so we're going on 2 parallel tracks, right? Like we know that increasing SNAP to actually match the cost of a healthy diet for individuals, households, and families is what needs to occur. But until that does, we need to help the food banking system and do our part to make sure we're getting quality food out to our partners.
Great. And Jacqueline, boots on the ground, right at the food donation level. Are there long-term things that we've not touched on that you'd like to see put into place?
I think everybody kind of covered most of it. I mean, by far, even in the food banking, our biggest cause is advocacy and policy change, and to be able to really have policy that identifies as the root cause of poverty, and not just what's going to tackle the symptoms of it. And so, what does that look like going forward? And in what ways can we shorten our line by doing that?
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you all for that. I'd like to change a bit and talk about some of the innovations in food donation and recovery that were sparked by the pandemic. Necessity is the mother of invention, and it seems to me that in the case of food rescue and recovery, certainly there was a clear necessity to both meet the demand of clients and also to adhere to all these restrictions on in-person interactions during the pandemic. So I'm curious if you can all speak a little bit to this and share some of the innovations or evolutions in the ways in which we do business, adaptations you saw being put into place. Jacqueline, why don't we start with you on this one?
So pre-pandemic, we were already working on different food recovery systems. We started a 3PL program, which is third-party logistics. And so instead of sending our drivers or our member partners out to these different stores every night to pick up, there was actually already a vendor going around making deliveries. So they were capturing that food for us and then bringing it directly to the food bank so we could go ahead and the next day get the product out. That was great as far as it's just super efficient. They hit way more stores than we can. They have more drivers and they're already there. So it really made sense. The other one that started that was because of the pandemic was FarmLink. And FarmLink is an amazing company that goes around and works with growers and producers in all areas of the country and just talks to them about what they can donate and how they can donate. And it's usually truckload fulls, which is great. But by far, the biggest thing that our food bank had to do was we were able to get the food in. We had a lot of people who really wanted to help, but we were getting stuck on the distribution side because volunteers weren't wanting to interact. We had member partners that were canceling their distributions because they didn't want to catch COVID. So there were a lot of different models that came from that. By far, our biggest one is groceries to go. So our CEOs came up with a platform that you could go on and register, come to our food bank, call us, let us know what spot you're in, and we walk out the product directly to you. The only downside to this model is there's no client choice. We weren't able to get that up and running fast enough. But that is definitely on the horizon, probably within the next year. We also worked with Amazon to get deliveries out, especially in our rural areas, because that was the hardest for us to get to. And it sounds real old school and tried and true, but by far drive-through models were super successful for us. So allowing neighbors to stay in their car while volunteers were able just to go to their trunk and put stuff in, which really limited that contact. And by far, that is the one innovation that we don't see going away.
That's an important point that you don't see it going away. I was going to ask, and maybe a question for everybody. Are there things that Jackie didn't mention that you think are important to call out here? And then also, do you see these what were temporary COVID implementations having staying power? Is this something that is improving operations and improving outcomes across the board? And that's for anybody, really. I'm not sure if any of you in particular want to jump in on that.
I'm happy to jump in. Sure. I would say there were many innovations within the food recovery system that were prompted by the pandemic. I think it also helped to accelerate the adoption of existing solutions. I think that was definitely the case when it came to technology innovations. Something that we really saw grow and expand during COVID was the adoption of food rescue apps. So apps that are able to connect donors with local food banks and shelters. That's really allowing for more, efficient food recovery and distribution. Some examples include Food Rescue Hero or Food Rescue US. These apps often, provide real-time information about available food donations and pickup requests. And they're really, working to fill in the gaps when it comes to last mile logistics and getting donations from point A to point B. And so I think we've only seen those platforms continue to expand and grow even after the pandemic. I think some other interesting ones, there were a lot of solutions that I think really focused on increasing the accessibility of the emergency food assistance network. So, with COVID, you had folks that had health and mobility challenges that really limited their ability to travel to pick up food. So a lot of innovations really focused on meeting people where they are. I think another example was really sort of the advent of home delivery programs. This was really accelerated during COVID, as Jackie already mentioned, partnership with Amazon. I think there were other examples of food banks and food recovery organizations partnering with, companies like DoorDash, for example. They had a large project during COVID called Project Dash, where they were partnering with over 300 nonprofit anti-hunger organizations in all 50 states to be able to provide home delivery programs during COVID. And I think a lot of food recovery organizations saw the value in being able to meet people who hadn't actually accessed the food assistance network before. So I think that one definitely has some staying power. It's really a question of funding to be able to sustain those programs. So those are some of the big ones. There are others, but I'll pause there.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate it.
I think one of the opportunities the pandemic brought, not necessarily was it innovation, but our food donation system imploded during the pandemic because there was very little surplus food, plus there was not the people to come pick up the food. And so it was the Wild West in that regard. But as we came out of it, we had an opportunity to rebuild it in a way that we wanted to be beneficial to everyone involved, and kind of looked at what was it before the pandemic, what occurred, and how can we build it better. And through that process, really started to talk to our food pantry, food bank partners as customers, and kind of ask them, how was that program working for you? How much food were you getting to people once donated, or how much did you have to compost? And all of these types of questions, and understanding, where we could do better within our stores and our standard operating procedures. And then what was happening with the transport of the food to food banks, and seeing that there was, a lot of missed pickups and a lot of food waste just because of the inconsistent nature of pickups, because the food banking system is so reliant on volunteer labor. I really think it's probably the only essential need industry that is dependent on volunteer labor. So the mention of a 3PL service, we think that is absolutely necessary to have the highest quantity and quality of donations coming out of large retail grocers. The apps don't really work for us because we're so high volume. I mean, it would take probably 5-6 Prius cars to pick up our food on a daily basis. So just the same kind of sophisticated logistics to get the food out of our stores on the back end and donate it as we have on the front end might be necessary. But we do, we think that would greatly improve the quality of food that's going out to the hunger relief agencies.
And I'll just chime in and echo quickly what Sarah has said. I think in conversations with all of our retail customers, they've really sort of seen the pandemic as an opportunity to understand, what was working well and where can we continue to improve. And so a lot of retailers are starting to think through, okay, how does our food donation program operate within stores? how can we reevaluate, our SOPs and our processes internally so that we're able to get as much food as possible to folks in need. So I think in that sense, it's really been a moment of change for food donations within retail, and it's certainly, moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I'll just add two thoughts. One on the app front, in addition to the ones that Jess mentioned, which really help facilitate donations between donors and the food rescue and food banks and those kinds of organizations. Another app that we've seen pop up a lot and with our city partners is called Too Good to Go, which works with a lot of bakeries and other things, and it's more consumer facing. So they help facilitate sales at a discount for extra food left over at the end of the day. And some of our partners in DC started working with this app, and they actually didn't see a decrease in donations going to food banks because of the app. I think that was maybe a concern that if the excess food is getting sold, there might be a decrease in donations, but that wasn't the case. And so I think apps like this are becoming more popular. And then another kind of innovation, I would say, in the space was the passing of the Food Donation Improvement Act. And I'm interested to hear how this has affected the other folks on this panel too. But this act, which passed at the beginning of this year, did two things. The first was expanding liability protections to direct donations. So if someone gives food directly to a person, and that person gets sick, they would not be able to be held liable as long as they donated in good faith with good food. And then the second is that it now allowed nonprofits like food banks and food pantries to sell some of the food at a Good Samaritan, very low cost price that is supposed to help cover some of the labor and volunteer labor and transportation and everything that goes into rescuing food. So the idea behind that being, like Sarah said, this food donation is so dependent on volunteer labor. So the idea is to try to generate a little revenue or create revenue generating opportunities to cover some of that cost to help the system be a little more resilient. So I think that is kind of a big change in how things have operated. I know some of our partners have been looking into selling food at a low cost, but I'm not sure how widely spread that has become yet.
I'm really glad you mentioned the Food Donation Improvement Act. That's a great pivot to another question I had on our list, because we're coming up on the 1 year anniversary. Curious for your all thoughts on what progress has been made and what other solutions do you think we need to consider to accelerate that change? And Nina's made some great points on that already. So I'm curious, Jess, do you want to kick us off with a little bit of some thoughts on the Food Donation Improvement Act?
Sure, happy to chime in here. And yeah, I would say, Nina really covered some of the major changes that we saw with the Food Donation Improvement Act. One thing I'll add is that it did put the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, right, which was passed in 1996, and the Food Donation Improvement Act under the jurisdiction of the USDA. So it now requires the USDA to be able to write regulations explaining safety and labeling requirements for donated food. So previously there was no guidance whatsoever. It was a little bit of a free-for-all. So that certainly is a major advancement there. I would say it's still early in terms of understanding the impact of the law, but in my conversations with food recovery organizations in this space, we know that liability concerns are a constant refrain that we've heard from potential donors. So I think this new law really addresses those concerns head on. In terms of, thinking through some other solutions from a policy perspective, there's a lot of opportunity to accelerate change. Hopefully we'll see more legislation like SB 1383 in California that's really first of its kind legislation that sets mandates for food recovery. So under SB 1383, food waste generators are actually required to implement food recovery programs with a statewide goal of recovering 20% of edible food that's currently being disposed of by 2025. So we've certainly seen that this law has had a significant impact on our retail customers in California. And we've been working closely with those partners in the state to help them meet those regulatory requirements, primarily through donation program technical assistance support, really focusing on those processes, looking at the data, identifying opportunities. And we've seen a impressive result there in being able to increase donations by, in some cases, upwards of 20%. And that work has certainly been motivated by SB 1383. And we've already seen some other states taking action. In Washington State, for example, they've already passed HB 1799, which sets similar goals when it comes to food recovery. So, I think laws in other states could certainly have a similar type of significant impact when it comes to increasing the amount of edible food that's being donated.
That's great. Jacqueline, Sarah, any thoughts on Food Donation Improvement Act coming up on the 1-year anniversary?
I think for me, we talk to a lot of produce donors. We're obviously in a very ag-rich area in Fresno, California, and they have to abide by various food safety aspects. And so they're always concerned when they're donating, how they won't be put on the hook for if somebody gets sick or we mistreat the product or, somewhere in between the cold chain gets broken. So the biggest thing that I've been able to tell our donors is if you would give it to your family, you can donate it. And it's a great way of just like resetting their mind, because there's a lot of product that's completely good that's just getting thrown away for quality or not hitting retail or all the different issues. And so that's just a great way of like relieving their mind and giving them like a baseline on what they can donate. The next one, kind of going over SB 1383, we're seeing it in different tiers. So tier 1 is retailers and other generators. 2 is going to be more restaurants, but there is actually like a third tier, and that's going to be households. And for us right now, we're trying to get ahead of it a little bit because there's so much ambiguity. I said that wrong, around customer and the dates. So the best by, sell by, use by, what an expiration date is. So we'll get somebody who calls and they're like, oh, you gave us an expiration date that was last week, and it's not an expiration date, it's a use by date. So then we have to explain to them what the difference is. And we're going to be seeing that a lot more. And it is super confusing when you have 3 different things. And really the only thing that expires is baby food. And that's the only one that we're overly concerned with. So everything else has to pass the smell test, but anything in cans can go way past the dates on it. So just recentering the minds of households too, that, just because it's past one of these dates just means that they're not going to guarantee the quality. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the food.
Great point about the best by dates. Sarah, anything to add to this one?
I would say that it hasn't changed much that we do yet, but it's definitely brought about some exciting ideas and conversations, and which we may be able to pilot. Don't hold me to it, but these are very exciting to us because we share a lot of the same customers as the Food Bank network and understand how convenient it would be for people to be able to access their food that they usually get for free, plus also shop. So why are we not helping people directly at our store sites? So there could be, the ideas range from what if we added these free donated items, on our e-commerce platform. So if somebody's ordering delivery or drive up and go, they could also get additional free donated groceries. Or less high tech, what if there's a food pantry right adjacent to us, or food lockers. There's a new concept of Amazon type lockers where people order it online, you can go pick it up. And then we're very conveniently located. We're open almost all hours. We're on bus lines. It would really reduce these barriers to people accessing food that they typically have to navigate the food banking schedule to access. So those types of ideas, we can at least now have those conversations. What does it look like for us to be in this space and to provide more access to the food directly to people?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great segue too, as well to my next question. So, one of the interesting new models for food banking that we've been reading about lately is one where food banks are reorienting their operations to support kind of a range of services that go beyond basic hunger relief. And some are calling it like a community service model as opposed to a food bank model. Um, as an example, Feeding Tampa Bay has a new community service strategy that centers around a facility they call the Opportunity Hub, where in addition to this grocery store style pantry that's shoppable, a clinic will provide healthcare services, a financial firm will provide financial literacy, an insurer is on hand to field insurance questions from people. So a real holistic kind of care model. And as another example, in California, Fresno Mission, a provider of services to the homeless, is bringing about 20 social service groups together, including Central California Food Bank with a free grocery store. So I guess just broadly, what are your thoughts on this kind of evolution in this model? And Jackie, since you have a little bit of firsthand experience with this approach, maybe you can kick us off by sharing how this new approach is changing how you serve clients.
This new approach is beautiful. I don't know other way to say it. It allows our neighbors to come in who are in crisis mode. So City Center really focuses on food, human trafficking, addiction services, foster care, orphans, and then it's just this holistic place where everybody could come in. But the idea behind City Center was to make it like you're walking into a home. So there's no white walls, there's no chairs sitting next to each other, there's couches, there's a coffee shop, there's a playground for kids. And really the thought behind it, the CEO of the mission, Matt Dildine, his thought behind it was he wanted people to come in and realize that they were loved and they were cared for and that what they were going through mattered. And so the City Center is an old hospital, and he always likes to talk about how if you were in an accident and you were in crisis mode and you went to the hospital, you wouldn't go to one hospital to get your arm x-rayed, and then another hospital to get a surgery, and then another hospital to get antibiotics, and then another hospital. It's kind of all in one. And that is really what City Center is. It's just a place where all of our services can come together and really help the individual in crisis and the different ways that they may need it. So our take in that is, of course, it's called First Fruits Market. And so it's a grocery store. So neighbors are able to come in, pick the products that they want, pick the products that they know their family is going to eat, pick the products that they need. And there's a checkout process, but obviously it's just to make sure our inventory is up. And then we help them carry their bags to the car. So there's just so much more than just like a food line on this. And so it really is going back and creating a store. And one of our CEOs drew a lot from the Safeways up north and being able to see how it was set up. So we are set up very much like a grocery store.
That's awesome. And I love the idea behind the holistic approach to that. Nina, Sarah, Jess, anything to add here? Have you seen this approach in other places? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can kick us off. I love that, Jackie. And I think that this model is kind of the future. Like we need, as we talked about in the beginning, we need to get at those root causes. And this is, holistically addressing people's issues because it's not one or the other. They're all intertwined. I have seen this across the country. I think I mentioned Metro Caring in Denver, one of our partners earlier, that has a very similar setup to the one Jackie was describing, with the fresh food market, but also bringing in lots of other services. One example from when I worked at the community food bank in Tucson that I thought was really cool was, in addition to having SNAP assistance and utility application assistance and that sort of thing, they also offered gardening classes, and then had this other program where they purchased food from backyard gardeners, especially those who had gone through the classes, to sell at the local farmers market. So it was kind of creating this system where people learn how to grow their own food and then also could become self-sufficient in selling that food at the local farmers market, which I thought was really awesome. And then one more example to bring in, actually from the international perspective, is we have a relationship with the city of Milan in Italy, and they have a very similar program in their city. They call them food hubs, but they're kind of like fresh food grocery stores with a bunch of other services there. So even internationally, this model is, I think, pretty prevalent.
Sarah, Jess, anything to add here?
And, like I mentioned, two parallel tracks, all of us are in the business of feeding the need, and we've been feeding the need for decades and decades, and it doesn't really seem to be decreasing. So at the same time, how are we shortening the line? And it's programs like these that will be shortening the line, but not even so much bringing the services to the food banks, but bringing the food to the services. So these food hubs that are mentioned, those did rise up out of the pandemic as well. We saw a lot of these, almost like the ones that I'm thinking of here in our region, almost looks like a tool shed type size. And it's put on the properties of community centers, of schools, of clinics, of other places where people go to find services. Because typically, people who are struggling with food insecurity also have time poverty, meaning they don't have the time to go from location to location to location to access these different services and training and education. So how about we bring this very essential need of food to where they're going to improve their lives and better their families and that type of thing. So we're seeing those innovations. At the same time, we transitioned away from huge food drives to raising funds for grocery carts. So that means when patients go into clinics, if they screen positive for food insecurity, they immediately receive this food assistance, as well as like produce vouchers. Schools can give them out, senior centers can give them out, because there's a lot of people who are struggling with food insecurity that will never present themselves to a food bank. So we're able to reach more people who are probably skipping meals or, that type of thing. So
I think this model is.
I think you were muted at the very beginning.
Oh, sorry about that.
You're good.
I was just going to echo what everybody has already said. I think this model is really the future. And I think it's really one of those long-term solutions that gets at addressing the fact that, food insecurity, again, is an economic issue. And the community service model, it really is, it's providing those essential services, but also giving clients the ability to choose the services that meet their needs. It's no longer, one size fits all model. They have the option to be able to go to the services that make the most sense for them, while also having that community building aspect of it as well. So I think, more solutions and models like this, where it's comprehensive in nature, it's client centered, and it's focused on taking a preventative approach to tackling food insecurity. I think those are the ones that are going to be the most successful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for the answers there. We're winding down our time together a little bit, so I want to get to this next one for sure. Let's turn our attention to the holiday season, with Thanksgiving only a week away, right? Traditionally, this is a key time of need for food banks, and also a time that consumers come forward to donate. So just this morning, Divert released new data showing that nearly half, 46%, of households are more likely to donate to food banks during the holiday season than at other times of the year. However, 20% fewer consumers are expected to donate this 2023 holiday season, citing high inflation and grocery costs. And just as a side note for those watching this stream, you can download this report from the comment section on LinkedIn. You can download it from a link in the YouTube description as well. So with that, my question to you all is, how have you seen inflation recently impacting food donations? And in what ways do you think we can address that? Is there a way that we can address that? Jacqueline, do you want to take first crack at this?
Yeah, so what we have been trying to do for us, we know that we're going to get less money than what we would normally get. So if you had a donor who would generally give you $100, they're maybe only going to give you 50 now because of what's going on. So our development team is really going out and trying to just get more of the smaller donors to make up for that. It's the best way we can. We have also, since the pandemic, kind of transitioned away from food drives. We're still excited if you want to hold them, but really fund drives are way more effective, especially even for the donors. For what they're buying at the store, I could buy for half. So giving us $1, I can create 4 meals out of, where if you go to the store, you might be able to buy 1 can for $1. So we really have a great ROI on donated money. So by far, that's been our biggest one. We are seeing less donations from bigger corporate donors, especially food donors, where we would usually get maybe 8 or 9 pallets of this product. This year, they're only going to be able to do 3 or 4. A lot of it has to do with supply chain issues or concerns. Some of it is also they're just trying to sprinkle it out more and hit more nonprofits. So we are seeing some change in that. And our biggest one, though, with consumers is just trying to explain the value that we can give off of your money as opposed to you going to the store and buying it.
It's really interesting, the difference between the donation and the food donation. Thanks for pointing that out. Sarah, how about over to you?
Yeah, so we have a fundraiser through November and December that benefits like a network of over 200 food banks. And actually, we have not seen a decrease. So I was surprised by the survey results. But I think, our secret sauce is really the huge volume of customers we have and the low level threshold to actually donate. So like if you just think about, would you like to round up? That's nothing to a lot of people, and they like round numbers. So, but after you add that up, after our volume of customers, you actually are raising quite a bit. And one of the best stats I think we can share is that we do see a significantly higher rate of donations from our lower income customers than we do our higher income customers, because they want a way to give back. They want a way to also contribute. So we haven't seen the decrease. I think, the tactic of going after more donors for less is probably a good one right now. And the funds we raise will be distributed in grocery carts to all the food bank partners, which they're loving because obviously they don't have enough food to provide people who come to them. So it's giving them food plus an opportunity to shop with their own choice conveniently. So the program's going well. It's resonating with people. It's the 3rd year, and we could see like a more great feedback, and just response from our customers gets better every year in that regard. So it might just be an adjustment of how to fundraise in this environment.
Yeah, great point. Nina, Jess, either of you, any thoughts on how inflation may be affecting donations, in particular around the holiday season?
Really quick, I'll just say we're not a direct service organization or grocery store, so I can't speak to exact impacts this year, but I do have some thoughts on how we could make a more resilient food system that is not at the whims of seasons and all of that, and inflation. One of them being investing in local and regional food systems. So shorter supply chains can circulate money in local economies that help communities survive these periods of turmoil. And also, like we've been talking about, focusing on shortening the line and making sure that people don't need to depend on the emergency food system for their daily food needs. And then lastly, I think it's ultimately about changing how us as a society values our food And if we valued food at its true cost, we wouldn't see it as something that maybe we could just throw away. And it's more about recognizing food as a basic human right that ensures people don't need to choose between affording food, affording healthcare, and housing.
Excellent. Jess, anything to add?
Sure. I'll just chime in here and echo some of the sentiments that Sarah expressed. I think in conversations with our retail partners, they haven't mentioned inflation and rising grocery costs is really impacting their donation programs. I think, our customers are typically forward-thinking retailers that have set ambitious food recovery goals for themselves. And so they recognize that there's still an incredible amount of opportunity to be able to donate more food. And that's really where their efforts have been focused. And they haven't seen yet inflation or those rising grocery costs impact those programs to date. I will say, that being said, and in some of our conversations with other food recovery organizations, like, Jackie mentioned, some donors have less to give in the current economic crisis. So, I would say it can really vary from donor to donor, or even region to region.
Well, I want to thank you all for the discussion today. This has been great. We are at time. If there's any final thoughts from any of the panelists, anything we didn't cover that you'd like to throw out there while we're all together. 4 great minds here on the screen. Well, we did cover a lot today, so I want to thank everybody for their time.
I would say one thing.
Yes, Sarah.
So I've been at tables where people are talking about food waste and other tables where people are talking about food security. And I think it'd be hugely beneficial if those tables come together more often, because we always have to think about, when we're recovering food, the humans that are receiving it on the other side. And I don't always hear that as part of the food waste conversation. So really appreciated you guys hosting this panel. But to really have a true solution, those sides need to work together very closely.
And really quick to build off that point, I totally agree. And one thing that my organization did this past year in partnership with some others is launch a Zero Food Waste Coalition. And our goal is to support food waste reduction policies, but ultimately, like Sarah said, create that space where all these organizations come together. So if you go to zerofoodwastecoalition.org, you can find more information, and we'd love to have more people at the table.
I'll build off of that and just say, I think the future of food recovery is really going to be collaborative and innovative partnerships, right? That are really focusing on how do we increase collaborations across sectors to be able to create those more comprehensive and efficient systems for food recovery and for addressing wasted food. We know that we're better together when we work together to advance those shared goals. So how can we bring more collaboration into the space? I think that's really going to be the future.
Jackie, any final thoughts?
I will say, as for most industries, the food banking really changed during the pandemic. One day it was one way, and then the next day you're thinking outside of the box for things that you never thought you would ever do in your life. And probably the best thing that came out of the pandemic is that now we're just always thinking about that and how we can move forward. And I think that goes the same for food recovery too, is just, hey, we can go off of this pivotal point in time where we didn't know what to do. And now how do we expand and grow and keep going with that, as opposed to, okay, well, that's done now, so we can just go back to whatever was before. And the new normal is, how do we constantly think outside the box? How do we constantly recover more? How do we constantly distribute more? How do we make sure that our landfills aren't getting full? So, lots of bad things came out of the pandemic, but at least the good one was just the outside of the box and bringing people together on how they can do stuff better.
Absolutely. Well, this has really been a great conversation. I can't thank the four of you enough for giving of your time to us and to the audience who's watching this. Really appreciate it. You know, it's such a interesting space that we all work in, and you know, from preventing food waste to making sure we're maximizing donations. There's so many angles to analyze and attack this problem of wasted food from, and everybody is in their own space doing it. So it's so interesting when we can get diverse people together who are looking at the problem from different angles or the same angles, just to have these discussions. So really, so much appreciate the time, and thank you for the valuable discussion. If you enjoyed this live stream, please be on the lookout. We will be doing these often, and we would love to see you again. So thanks everybody for watching, and thank you all for participating, and we'll see you next time.